The Polar Bear Werewolves, or the Snow Devil Dogman. Welcome to Scary Stories. This time we've got another collection of stories which all have an overlapping quality with each other. In this case, it's that these are sightings of white dogmen or werewolves, real werewolves seen in the snow. Now, these two seem to fit together to me. I guess we'll find out if you agree or not. Now let's kick it off with this one right here, which the story submitter calls, "Me and my brother seen some frozen cave dogmen who came to life." Dear Scary Stories NYC, me and my family went to camping in the garden of my father, which is a place we park our RVs sometimes. Now, this time it was last winter, and it was really super cold. It gets colder up there sometimes than it gets anyplace else. It looks on a map like it's located in the middle of all this natural wild area. And technically it is. But when you zoom in, you can see that it's in a small town, not in the middle of nowhere. You can go walk in nature, you can hang out by the river, but it's got roads on either side. It's not in the wilderness. So even though it was a really cold night, me and my brother Todd had to get away from our grouchy parents who were arguing about what temperature the RV's heater should be set on. We bundled up, but it was still brutally cold out there. I don't think it had started snowing yet for that day, but it had been snowing a lot in the recent past, and it was overcast and windy. We wrapped ourselves in scarves to warm the air up enough to breathe, and I remember icy snow being blown into my eyes by the wind. After a few minutes of this, I realized we weren't having much fun. It took all our energy just to move forward in this weather, and we weren't even having a conversation as we marched along. I was about to tell my brother I thought we should go back, when he pointed out that he saw a cave. I think I said before that we had been to camping in the garden of my father already, and we had also walked through those woods across the street from the park before too. There wasn't ever a cave there before, yet we were both seeing it with our eyes. So we had to go closer and figure out what we were seeing that looked so much like a cave entrance. When we got up closer to it though, it looked more and more like what it was. And what it was this big dark hole leading forward and then leading down into the earth. There was a faint mist coming from it, and when we got close, we could feel it was warmer inside. Now, I'm not talking about Florida warm. I'm talking about maybe it was 38 or 40 degrees American. Or maybe 1, 2, 3 degrees Canadian. Just a little bit above freezing, but therefore warmer than it was out in the snow. The cave entrance was tall enough that we could bend over and walk into it, crouching down. The first thing we did, though, was bang our heads pulling back out of there, because it smelled so bad. Like rotting meat or something. Actually, that was probably what we were smelling exactly. Todd said it must have been a frozen dinosaur, or maybe one of those big hairy elephants. It was probably frozen in the ice and now it was thawing out. The idea of that was enough for us to go back in and look around. We breathed through our mouths with scarves wrapped around, but it still made my eyes water, and I kept fighting the feeling that I should gag. When we got inside, we tried to take pictures, but none of them came out. Our flashes wouldn't work on either phone, and the photos were out of focus, too. Now I was expecting to find the kill cave of some carnivore, but this place was not that. It was full of animals, but they were not ones that had been eaten, like they weren't vegetarians or deer or squirrels. They were these animals that we at first thought were polar bears, but then we could see that they were actually big dogs. They were all standing up on their hind legs, and they had icicles coming off of them or hanging from them. There were 3 of them, but the third one had started rotting away in places. That must have been the source of the horrible odor. And since the icicles hanging off of these things were dripping water, it looked like the other 2 were going to start rotting openly soon too. We tried again to take pictures, and the phones made that camera sound, but this time they didn't even give us a blurry or dark picture. It only made that camera sound but never took a shot. It stunk to high heaven in that cave, so we decided to go back to the RV. Maybe we could break up our parents fighting for a second with this story. But before we left, my brother silently nudged me and pointed out something I had not been noticing. One of those polar bear dogmen or werewolves seemed to be moving one of his clawed fingers. I wondered if maybe this was just the figure moving back and forth through some natural action because it was warming up and thawing out. But I also wondered if this was the animal coming back to life. Neither one of those things seemed like something we should want to stick around to see though. So we left. When we got back to the RV, things seemed to have quieted down. We told our parents what I just told you, and my father seemed most intrigued. He was saying that me and my brother had stumbled onto a fairy cave. We told him we didn't see fairies. We saw white werewolf-type animals, frozen stiff. Dad said he thought that although what we had seen was real when we saw it, we're also lucky we got out of the cave in time, because it probably already had ceased to exist. At least in this reality. My mother started making noises like she didn't believe Dad, but Todd and I wanted to hear more of his theory. So Dad said he figured that the cave popped into existence and then back out. And if we stayed in there, we might never have gotten home. Mom said Dad was being dramatic, and that we were just describing a scene from Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. The two of them bickered about it. Todd shouted that a white werewolf was outside the window. It was a different one from the ones we had seen, but it was also frozen and thawing. Dad turned to my mother saying, "Ha, so you didn't believe my theory, eh? Well, there goes the proof right outside." And then Mom turned the tables on him, saying that it was his theory that the cave blinked out of existence. If so, then why did a monster follow our sons home from it, if it didn't exist any longer? So the two of them were screaming like idiots at each other once more, and me and my brother Todd, we were watching the monster walking around outside. We saw it shake one of the other RVs, but nobody came out when it did, so then the monster walked off into the woods. In the morning, all four of us went to where me and my brother had seen the cave, but there was no cave there any longer. Nothing that even looked anything like a cave was there. It was just nature, you know? Just snow. My brother Todd says maybe the cave heard my parents arguing from a ways off, and just split, like we wished we could have done. Maybe their unending stupid pointless bickering just scared the cave system away. But in either case, me and my brother seen some frozen cave dogman who came to life. The three-fingered white dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I'm going to tell you the tale of how I saw a three-fingered white dogman in York County, Pennsylvania, during a snowstorm when I was a kid. My father saw it as well, but he is no longer here to corroborate my story. York is on the southern border of Pennsylvania, down by Maryland. It's just to the east of this mountain range which stretches down south through West Virginia. It pretty much defines the border between Tennessee and North Carolina. And people have been telling strange stories about those mountains since there have been people living there. Add one more story to that list. The white werewolf of Pennsylvania is real. Or it was back in those days at least. And now, my cousin and her kids are living in the old house now, so I'm not going to tell you exactly where it is, but it wasn't far from Andersontown, which is to say that it was in a part of the state that is more heavily forested. The country, as my mother used to call it. My mother is from Brooklyn in New York City, and she said my dad was a country bumpkin. I don't remember what year it was, but it was the early 80s. Probably around 40 years ago now when I do the math. It was a really bad snowstorm, and it hit Pennsylvania hard. It was like 3 feet of snow, and drifts of it were well over 6 feet. It was an incredibly dangerous environment, but it was also a once-in-a-lifetime situation. So my father and I overruled my mother, and the two of us went for a walk in the worst snowstorm that either of us would ever see. Dad made me hold his hand, which I was embarrassed about since I was 13 by then, I would say. Too old to be holding your dad's hand, but the wind gusts would swoop up suddenly, and the ground was slippery. Dad told me he was afraid I would blow away and get my head smashed into a phone pole or something. After he said that, I clutched his hand tighter. So we had deliberately wandered toward a patch of woods near us to see what the storm looked like in there. And that was when we saw it. There was a man walking out of there. A big, huge, pale white man. I don't mean Caucasian. I mean he was a color much like the color of the snow. Of course, Dad and I stopped to stare. And when the man saw us, he immediately crouched down, as though we wouldn't see him if he made himself a bit smaller. He was probably still taller than my father, even crouched down though. So nobody ever believes this next part, but we started slowly walking toward that creature, and it started creeping up on us. I don't know why nobody believes this part, since all I'm saying is that we were curious about it, and it was curious about us. I don't think it had seen humans before, and I know we had never seen a snow devil dogman like this monster. He had 3 clawed fingers on each hand, and he sort of held them out in front of himself like a monster in an old silent movie. It was like he was trying to look scary on purpose, and instead it had just made us curious. So this thing had red eyes, but I didn't see any of the glowing eye stuff that some people talk about in terms of dogmen. It's possible that this was an albino. Maybe the eyes were pink and I only interpreted them as red in the dark. Some people say we saw a skinny polar bear, but a polar bear walking through the woods in the middle of Pennsylvania in the early 80s would probably be an even bigger mystery than seeing a 3-fingered albino werewolf there anyhow. I have no idea what that was, but it decided that it didn't want us getting any closer to it. The beastman sort of roared, or maybe just wanted us to see its fangs, which were impressive. It looked as though all his teeth ended like daggers. Every tooth was a canine in this canine. Dad pulled me behind him and we both moonwalked out of there. That was an 80s expression invented by Michael Jackson. I don't know if it survived into this century. I mean to say that we kept our eyes on that creature, but we walked backward and away from it. When it seemed satisfied that we were backing down, it turned around and headed back into the woods, the way it had come out. While we walked home, Dad marveled at how the snowstorm was forcing creatures out of their normal locations. He wondered out loud where that werewolf-like creature had come from. Maybe it normally lived up in the mountains, and the snow forced it down into the valleys to look for food or shelter. That made a lot of sense to me, but Mom made fun of both of us when we got inside. Mom was always calling people liars and stupid. She insisted she knew better than everyone. I guess soap operas must have given her this encyclopedic knowledge, I'm not sure. To Mom, this story never happened, and men are just prone to exaggerating. What would we have been exaggerating that might have ended up being a story about a 3-fingered white werewolf-type dogman being seen in a snowstorm? I've found it insulting over the years how people will dismiss this story and roll their eyes without ever even giving an alternate theory that might explain what we were roared at by. We saw an animal with white fur that was taller than my dad even though it was bent over at the hip. What was it? I say a Pennsylvania dogman, but since there's no animal with that name that is officially considered in existence, who knows what I'm saying when I say that? More recently, I've made friends with an elderly gentleman who has lived his entire life in the hills over there. He tells me, and this is his opinion, not mine, but he says that the creatures like the one me and Dad saw walk out of holes in the air. He was calling them holes in the ozone, but I later learned that he just thought that was a funny thing to call them. They were actually holes in the air up on those mountains, and you could walk into those holes to go somewhere else. Also, things like that 3-fingered dogman could walk out of the holes and go down to the valley to visit on some humans. I asked the man if the holes were more likely to happen in bad weather, and he insisted that the opening of these holes causes bad weather. The bigger the storm, the bigger the rip in the atmosphere. This is why human beings all instantly shudder when we hear thunder. It's because we know on some deep forgotten level of our subconscious that thunder and lightning and rain and snow means there's a distortion and a disturbance in reality somewhere near us. It's not a random act of the weather either. It's intelligently guided, intelligently opened, and it lets things through of all levels of consciousness and intelligence. Light beings come through the portals and demonic monster things as well. The old man told me that the white-furred monster we saw was probably demonic. The 3 fingers were a dead giveaway according to him. He said we were lucky it seemed confused by the storm and by us. It must not have deliberately been there. It must have wandered into our world by accident on that night. If it had come here with malicious intent though, then that old man told me that my dad and I would not have lived to tell the tale. I shiver all over just thinking about it. So there's just one more part to this. It's sort of almost like an epilogue, but it really happened. I guess this would have been around 1999 or 2000. I was in my later 20s and I got into Philadelphia with some friends to see some bands play. I was driving on the way back and we were on some highway going west. Oh no, wait, I remember, it was the Lincoln Highway, the one with all the stores on it, but it was late at night and most everything was closed down and dark. I could swear we were somewhere around Salisbury Township when this happened, but I can't see anything on the map that looked like the spot. It was wooded on both sides and I don't see that happening around Salisbury on Google Maps. Anyway, to get to the point, somewhere coming back, we were on a little 2-lane highway, and this big white dog ran across the road in front of us. It was far enough away that I didn't have to hit the brakes before it was gone and back in the woods. But it was close enough that everyone in the car saw it and went, "Whoa, did you see that?" And they all saw it sprint across the road on all fours. But I, as the driver, noticed it a split second before the rest of them. And when I saw it come out of the woods, it did so on its 2 hind legs. I don't know if it saw us coming or what, but as it stepped out of the woodline, it fell forward onto its arms, and suddenly they were his front legs. He ran like a wolf would run, even though he was the size of a pony. That story was also a winter story, which makes me wonder why that would be. Do the white werewolves only come out in the snow, where they will be camouflaged? What do they look like the rest of the year? It's almost as though my witness encounters argue against it being real as much as for it being real. I really do think Pennsylvania is a weird state. Maybe the laws of nature are different here or something. I've got no better explanation for the 3-fingered white dogman. Whether they use crayons or paint them in with Dayglow, I hope they enjoy the coloring book ordered up by Swaylo. Swaylo is a parent who got our digital werewolf coloring book for their 3-year-old werewolf-loving child. You can use a printer to print these pages out and color them in with crayons or markers, so it's good for kids as well as adults. Thanks, Swaylo. I should also mention that if you like these 2 polar bear dogman stories, there was actually a 3rd one called The Bloody-Faced Werewolf that I had to delete for being a bit too violent. You can see it if you're a channel member or PayPal club member though. Hopefully it's online right now or else it should be coming out soon, Sunday night at the latest. And if you would like to become a channel member and see that, then listen to the wise words of our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank?
Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
more scary stories.